I stepped out of my palanquin in front of the palace, a monolithic structure of hewn stone that loomed against the night. In spite of my tiredness, I was looking forward to meeting my new family. When Ram took me by the hand and led me forward, I accompanied him eagerly, a little nervous but ready to do what I could to make them like me. I had no idea that I was about to be sucked into the whirlpool of palace politics. Dasharath's three queens were lined up in front of the massive front doors to welcome their new daughters in law. Kaushalya, Kaikeyi, and Sumitra stood side by side, the picture of amity, so that I wondered if perhaps my mother had been misinformed about their rivalry. There was no time to think further, for Ram was introducing me to his mother. I noticed that Kaushalya was quite a bit older than the other two women, with a wrinkled face and dark circles under her eyes. But her smile was genuine as she pressed sindoor on my forehead and took my hands in hers. Behind each queen waited a line of servants bearing gifts for the daughters in law. One of the lines I could see right away was much longer than the others. The queen at the head of this line was lithe and status quo and dressed in a splendid red saree. She was greeting Bharat, so I guessed this was Kaikeyi. I glanced curiously at her face, but most of it was covered by jewels and a glittery veil. I peered past her to see how Sumitra was welcoming Urmila, but I could not see much. As the servants came forward and offered gifts to the new brides, I understood that unlike the dowry items that Dashrath had brought to the wedding, these had been paid for by the queens out of their own coffers. The expense and quality of the gifts indicated how rich each queen was and how powerful. Clearly, in this regard, Kaikeyi was far ahead of the others. As Kaushalya's servants presented me with gifts, I could see that they were in good shape but not new. My mother in law admitted as much, her voice apologetic. My own mother gave these to me at my wedding. I have saved them all these years, dreaming of the moment when I would pass them on to my daughter. For that is how I think of you. I do hope you like them. I was a little disappointed, for they were not to my taste, which ran like my mother Sunaina's toward the simple and elegant. These jewelry sets were too heavy, their stones dulled from years spent within dark chests. The thick cloth of gold saris were definitely out of fashion. The silk bolsters and curtains looked a little faded, and the platters and glasses were large and cumbersome. To the side, Kaikeyi was lavishing all kinds of expensive presents upon Mandavi, saris newly woven in colors I had never seen, jewels in settings of exquisite craftsmanship, boxes made of ivory and mother of pearl, glittering vials filled with perfumes, combs, and mirrors made of filigreed gold, even a large purple parrot, unlike any I had seen before, that had been trained to bow and say good morning. Hearing my mother in law, she looked at us and laughed. It was a sound that managed to be lilting, charming, and disdainful all at the same time. Kaushalya's shoulders sagged and she seemed to shrink. I could see how afraid she was that I would think less of her because these gifts were not fancy enough and that it would affect our relationship. Impulsively, I stepped forward and gave her a hug. Speaking louder than I needed to, I said, I love everything you have given me, Kaushalyama. Anyone can buy new things, but presents passed down the generations hold in them the blessings of the elders. I am sure your saris will bring me luck. I look forward to wearing one of them for the next royal event. Maybe you would like to help me choose it? I would like that, Kaushalya said, her face transformed into a wreath of smiles, tears of joy glimmering in her eyes. With a spring in her steps, she led me towards my quarters, chattering about the prayer ceremony she was planning for Ram and me, and how the red silk with the parrot green border would be just right for the occasion. Over her head, Ram threw me a grateful smile, but I could sense Kaikeyi's hard stare on my back. I had already failed to follow my mother's warning. Be polite and respectful to all and don't take sides. The next few days were a blur of court ceremonies, prayer services, and countless guests. All the neighboring kings paid us a visit, furious to see the princesses that the sons of Dashrath had brought home all of a sudden. The story of the great vow had spread across the land, so I was of special interest to them. From their respectful manner and lavish gifts, I understood that Koshal was even more important than I had realized. This scared me a little because, as eldest, Ram would one day rule this mighty land, and it would be my job to support him in being the greatest king possible. I allowed Kaushalya to dress me the way she wanted for all the events, and her delight in seeing me wear her gifts was so great that I didn't mind being out of fashion. But, sister, Urmila protested. The clothes our mother chose for you are so much more beautiful. And Kausalyama, nice as she is, doesn't even know how to drape a sari to bring out the best in you. I'm sorry. But this green sari makes you look like a tightly wrapped bottle gourd. She herself was most elegantly attired in a pale pink sari with a shimmer of gold running through it. But fashion was not as important to me as to Urmila. There would be time enough to wear my mother's saris. And in any case, Ram's eyes were on me all the time too. The appreciation in them went beyond mere admiration of my looks. Ram's evenings were spent with his father discussing how to make Kaushal more prosperous, and they usually had their night meal in the king's chambers. Yes, my father in law had separate quarters which no one entered unless invited. I suspected he retreated there when the drama created by his wives became too much for him. Dashrath liked things done right and he liked variety. So the cook would send in gold platters filled with numerous items, different each day. Ram described the food for me: a hill of fragrant rice, topped with ghee, surrounded by appetizers and curries, and finally, bowls and dishes filled with desserts from different regions of Bharatvarsha, laddus and kheer. The king had a sweet tooth. Ram, who was a frugal eater, would only sample things and end his meal with a bowl of yogurt, while Dashrath shook his head and declared he needed to eat more. How, otherwise, would he have the strength to rule a land as vast and prosperous as Koshal, surrounded by greedy kings just waiting to grab a piece of it? I didn't mind Ram's busy days. At evenings, I felt I could tell Ram things I would have hesitated to bring up otherwise. He, too, must have felt the same, for he told me about sorrows and fears which, judging from his calm daytime demeanor, I would never have guessed. I told Ram about how I often wondered who my real parents were and why they had abandoned me, how much I wanted to find them, and how guilty and ungrateful I felt about this because King Janak and Queen Sunaina had been so good to me. For his part, he confessed his doubts. Would he be ready when the time came to take on the burden of ruling Koshal? Would he have the strength to be a good king? What do you mean by good king? I asked. One who rules not by force but by example, he said. His voice deepened and his diction grew formal so that I could tell how crucial this was to him. One who follows the laws perfectly, even when his heart might beg him to do otherwise. No blame should ever attach to a king, for then how can he pronounce judgment on others? Our scriptures say such a king blessed his kingdom. I told him it was most commendable, if a bit too idealistic. What I didn't tell him was that, as he had spoken, a dart of disquiet had shot through me. Another evening, Ram told his mother's tragic story. The only child of the king of Kaushal, Kaushalya had been married to Dashrath amidst great jubilation. Although not exceptionally beautiful, she was a sought after prize because half the kingdom of Kaushal came with her as dowry. Furthermore, her father promised Dashrath that upon his death, his son in law would rule the entire country. Dashrath was a handsome and dynamic young man then, and Kaushalya a simple and good hearted girl. She delighted in the importance of being the royal consort and accompanying him on all state occasions. Dashrath was kind and respectful to her. It was not a perfect marriage by any means, Ram said dryly. He was genuinely fond of her and liked conversing with her. Though she did not understand the subtleties of statesmanship, she admired even his smallest achievements and he enjoyed that. He allowed her to fuss over him, laying out his clothes, fixing his favorite dishes, and this gave her great satisfaction. A few years into their marriage, Kaushalya gave birth to a daughter, Shanta. Dashrath gave the girl to his friend King Romapada because of a promise he had made earlier. Kaushalya did not like this, but she took comfort in the belief that she would provide her beloved husband with a male heir soon. But unfortunately, no other children came. Dashrath began looking for another wife, finally choosing Kaikeyi, daughter of Ashwapati, and forming an alliance with the powerful kingdom of Kekeya. That too, Kaushalya accepted. Royal marriages were often strategic, and the kingdom did need a prince. But what wounded her to the heart, Ram said, was that my father fell completely in love with Kaikeyi, her beauty, her intellect, and her courage. And many hours of his days were now spent with his new wife. To make matters worse, Kaikeyi had been trained in the art of war. The next time there was a battle, she insisted on driving Dashrath's chariot. She performed superbly, and Dashrath won the battle, which further strengthened her hold over him. She drove his chariot in other wars too, and twice saved his life. Totally captivated and deeply indebted to Kaikeyi, Dashrath gave her the best chambers in the palace and sought her counsel in all matters. He spent all his time, except for a few minimal hours in court, with her. Demoted and forgotten, my mother felt her life was over. Even the servants, aware of her powerlessness, ignored her. But Kaikeyi couldn't give him the son he wanted, could she? I asked. No. Father made a third alliance, bringing home Sumitra, princess of Kashi. But Kaikeyi somehow managed to retain her position as his favorite queen. Finally, the desperate Dashrath managed to get the famous Rishya Shringa Muni to perform a Putra Kamishti Yajna for him. Out of the sacrificial fire came a luminous being carrying a vessel of kheer. Drinking this, he said, would make the queen pregnant. As royal consort, my mother sat beside my father in the yajna and received the kheer. But her delight was short lived. My father insisted that she share it with Kaikeyi. My mother couldn't disobey the royal command, but she diluted it by giving some of the kheer to Sumitra. Thus, the four of us were born. You must have been a great solace to your mother, I said, pleased that we were entering a happier part of the story. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Even in the dark, I could hear the sorrow vibrating through my husband's voice. She thought my birth, and especially the fact that I was the eldest, would bring her what she had always longed for, the attention of the husband. But it didn't. Father gave her many rich gifts and then went back to Kaikeyi, whose influence over him grew even stronger when she gave birth to Bharat. Ram, however, remained Dashrath's favorite. This was a two edged sword for Kaushalya. She loved that the king cherished her son more than the other boys. Dashrath had little to say to Kaikeyi and Sumitra's sons when their mothers dressed them in their best and brought them over to offer pranams. But he would sit for hours listening to the baby Ram babbling nonsense. This also meant, however, that Dashrath wanted him nearby all the time. Kaushalya got Ram to herself only to bathe and feed and sing lullabies at night. Her mother heart was always hungry, but she had one solace. Ram slept in her bed. She would force herself to stay awake at night just to watch him sleep peacefully. But things got worse. When I was a little older, my father decreed that I should live in his quarters. He took excellent care of me. Sometimes, waking at night, I would find him personally covering me with the quilt I had kicked off, or soothing a nightmare. Awed by his man, larger than life, who was not only my father but my king as well, I couldn't tell him how much I missed my mother. Soon Dashrath began to take Ram to court with him. I could picture Ram, a quiet and serious boy, listening to debates about law and justice, strategic meetings about wars, and long discussions of what was best for the kingdom. All of it sank deep, transforming him from a child into a prince. I was particularly struck by the complaints against the man eating Rakshasas that were encroaching upon our kingdom from the forest borders, terrorizing our people, Ram said. I remember announcing to my father that I would drive them away permanently, failing that I would kill them. I remember how proud that made him. You fulfilled your promise, didn't you, when you rid Vishwamitra of the Rakshasas that were running the prayer ceremonies in his ashram? I said. Yes, I tried to run them off first, but Tataka and her people, foolishly brave, refused to retreat. They attacked Lakshman and me, and I was forced to cut them down, Ram said. It gave me no pleasure though. For a while, we both silently contemplated what he had said. I was surprised, pleasantly so, that Ram didn't revel in his victory over the Rakshasas. Then he went on with his story. I was lost even further to my mother when I was sent to sage Vashishta for my education. On my brief visits home, there were many demands on my time, attending events in the Raj Sabha so that the courtiers would get used to me sitting beside my father, offering my opinions on matters of state, riding in processions across Ayodhya, tossing coins at citizens, and of course spending time with my father king, who insisted that I eat and sleep in his royal chambers. I crept away to my mother whenever I could so she could cook me a favorite dish or two. But all too soon it would be time for me to go back to the ashram. My mother never complained, but I felt the heavy weight of her sadness. He sighed. Some people are born unlucky, possessing so much externally, yet destitute within. My mother is one of them. Thank you for listening. I have never shared this with anyone, not even Lakshman. I appreciated his trust, but I was not willing to let go of the story. Now that you are a man, can't you do something for your mother? When I vowed to marry only one woman, I did it as much for her as for you. To tell her that I felt her pain and would never make another woman suffer as she did. I hope she understood. What else can I do without going against my father? He shook his head. But enough of old sorrows. It's late. We must rest now. He fell asleep in the sudden way he had. He never wasted time, especially on things he believed that he couldn't change. But I lay awake for a long time listening to him breathe. I didn't believe in giving it to fate, not without a good fight. Kaushalya had done everything possible in her sweet and simple way to make me feel at home in Ayodhya. In return, I was determined to do something to make her life better. Thanks for listening.